The movie I chose to watch for the final project in Psych 380 was The One Who Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. In this movie, Randall Patrick McMurphy, or just McMurphy, is transferred to a mental institution from a prison farm. He pretends to be crazy in hopes of finding some sense of freedom from the labor he must do at the prison farm. He finds that life is not as easy as he thought it was going to be in the mental institution due to the strong-willed nurse Miss Ratched. This movie consists of many different biopsychological aspects, concepts, including the use of electroshock therapy, a surgical lobotomy, and fairly accurate representations of different mental illnesses and mental institutions in the 1950s. So to begin, I will talk about the three characters who undergo electroshock therapy. In one scene of the movie, Cheswick is freaking out because he wants his own cigarettes. Nurse Ratched is rationing them since some of the patients were using them in place of money while playing cards with McMurphy. McMurphy punches through the glass that was shielding the nurse's station and grabs the cigarettes for Cheswick. He ends up fistfighting one of the guards, and the chief ends up ending the fight by grabbing the guard off of Miss McMurphy. The three then go upstairs where they find chronically ill patients. They end up going through electroshock therapy as punishment. So, was electroshock therapy truly used in mental institutions during the 1950s? Yes. According to a webpage exhibiting some of Missouri State's archives on sos.mo.gov, doctors favored the use of electroshock therapy during the 1950s. Also, according to the same webpage, an actual electroshock therapy patient in 1957 described the process of electroshock therapy. The patient said, and I quote, that one attendant stands at the head of the table to put the rubber heel in their mouth so they won't chew their tongue during the convulsive stage. The movie makes a point to show the attendant actually putting the rubber heel in McMurphy's mouth. The process of electroshock therapy portrayed in the movie seemed to coincide with this patient's description of electroshock therapy in 1957. According to scientificamerican.com, ECT was used in mental hospitals during the 1950s to control difficult patients and to maintain order on wards, which is how it was used in the movie. So next I will talk about McMurphy's lobotomy. Towards the end of the movie, McMurphy throws a party and invites Rose and Candy, which are two prostitutes. The ward is wrecked with trash and empty liquor bottles as patients are sprawled out drunk on the floor the next morning when Nurse Ratched finds them. When she is interrogating Billy, he blamed McMurphy. Billy ends up killing himself because he was afraid Nurse Ratched was going to tell his dominating mother that he slept with Candy. McMurphy attacked Nurse Ratched and tried to kill her by strangulation. His punishment this time was a lobotomy instead of ECT. So, when McMurphy is returned to his bed, he is portrayed as a vegetable. The chief ends up suffocating him by holding a pillow over his face. I inferred that the chief probably felt as if he was doing McMurphy a favor, since he's probably not going to have a very good quality of life after that. According to Britannica.com, a lobotomy is a neurosurgical operation that involves severing the connection in the brain's prefrontal lobe. In the movie, we can see the lesion on McMurphy's skin is located on the frontal part of the skull. So he had like a little gash right there where they had gone into his frontal lobe. According to a webpage on NPR.org addressing frequently asked questions about lobotomies, About 50,000 people received lobotomies in the U.S., and most of them were between 1949 and 1952. According to Dr. Baron Lerner, a medical historian and professor at NYU Langone Medical Center in New York, the main long-term side effect of prefrontal lobotomies was mental dullness. And the way that McMurphy was portrayed after his lobotomy was a good example of mental dullness, according to Dr. Lerner. He even referred to the movie as, and I quote, disturbingly real. Lerner also mentioned in his interview with Live Science that mental institutions played a critical role in the prevalence of lobotomy. He says by giving unruly patients lobotomies, doctors could maintain control over the institutions. So, next, let's talk about mental illness. So, all the patients in the movie were very noticeably mentally handicapped. However, I was able to identify some mental illnesses over others. One example of mental illness was portrayed by Chief Bromden. He was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and appears deaf and mute in order to protect him from those who are out to get him. He finally speaks to Miss McMurphy as they await electroshock therapy. A second example of mental illness was portrayed by Billy Babbitt. Billy suffers from a severe speech impediment. I inferred that he suffers from depression since it is said in the movie that he has attempted suicide before. As mentioned previously, McMurphy sneaks a prostitute named Candy into the institution and helps Billy get laid. Nurse Ratched ends up finding both Billy and Candy naked in bed together the next morning. Nurse Ratched threatens to tell Billy's mom, and he ends up taking his life due to the extreme anxiety. A third example of mental illness was portrayed by Dell Harding. Harding voluntarily admitted himself to the hospital as he recognized the problems in his heterosexual marriage. Ironically, Harding suffers from homosexuality. According to ncbi.nlm.nih.gov, homosexuality was seen as a mental illness up until 1973, which is when it was removed from the second edition of the DSM. And the fourth and final example of mental illness portrayed in the movie was by someone named Martini. During a basketball game, McMurphy yells at him for throwing the ball at the fence. Little did he know that Martini suffers from hallucinations, and he was innocently passing the ball to an imaginary player. Like I mentioned, all characters seem to be mentally handicapped in some way. However, the movie did not go into specific detail about each one's specific illness. So I mentioned the ones that I was able to identify through their character in the movie. This is also a book, so I'm sure in the book it's more in depth about each character and what they suffer from. The movie also gives a good representation of mental institutions during the 1950s. I watched this movie once before in an introduction to psychology course in high school. I learned in that class, my sophomore year, that a lot of times people were admitted to mental institutions during this time period because state officials did not really know what to do with people who were not part of society's norms. So this is why lots of criminals were placed in mental institutions instead of being kept in prisons. At one point in the movie, Dr. Spivey, Nurse Ratched, and another doctor were talking about sending McMurphy back to the prison work farm. They had suspicions that he was faking, which he was. They came to the conclusion that he was not crazy, but he was a danger to society. So Nurse Ratched even said that they should keep him in the ward because they would just be pawning their problem off to someone else. So again, people were sent to mental institutions when people were tired of dealing with certain people and didn't really quite know what to do with them. Although most of the movie is accurate, the portrayal of hydrotherapy of the hydrotherapy machine in the movie and its utilization appeared to me as some science fiction. According to the same webpage mentioned before on sos.mo.gov, hydrotherapy was more popular in the 1930s than in the 1950s. And according to the American Psychiatric Association archives, patients were placed in steam cabinets. The warm water often had a calming effect on patients, which I believe to be true. When I take a bath, when I'm stressed out, it chills me out a little bit. But in the movie, the hydrotherapy machine is portrayed as a water fountain with basically a water hose attached. However, McMurphy utilized the machine by spraying his acquaintances who were arguing while playing cards with water to calm them. It worked, but this is not really how hydrotherapy was performed in history. And answering the question, would you recommend this movie for a biopsychology student? Why or why not? I would recommend this movie for a biopsychology student because it gives a pretty accurate representation of how people were treated in mental institutions, despite the fictional storyline. We learn about electroshock therapy and lobotomies in various psychology courses, and this movie shows how ECT and a lobotomy would have been realistically utilized in mental institutions during the 1950s. We learn about different mental illnesses in abnormal psychology, but we learn about the brain abnormalities that characterize these different mental illnesses in biopsych. When watching this movie, you tend to feel more empathy for the patients in the institution because you now understand the neuroscience behind these different mental illnesses. And after learning the neuroscience behind the illness, you understand even more than before that these people truly cannot always help their mental illness and their mental issues. It gives a greater appreciation for clinical psychology and the advancements that have been made because people in mental institutions today are treated more like human beings than animals. And it was a pretty funny and great movie. I loved it. Thank you.